Hello ladies and gentlemen, today I want to take a look with you at my favorite weapon builds that are non-meta weapons, that are kind of reasonably priced and some real budget options in between. So yeah, let's take a look, and I will link all of my weapon builds that I will showcase in this video in the video description and maybe a pinned comment. So let's take a look. So first of all, I would like to start with some SMG builds, starting with some true budget builds. And the best guns to do that, in my opinion, are the Bizon and the Uzi. Maybe starting with the Uzi, I think it's a more limited option than the Bizon, but it has a higher fire rate. So I think both weapons can be decently built on a budget, and even if you kit them out completely, they are still a lot cheaper than other options. The Uzi, for example, if you take a look and go to loadouts, you see this is my fully pimped loadout. It's about 120k, but you can easily build the Uzi for under 100k. But let's take a look at this one. So if you apply, go to modify, you can directly switch into the firing range. So the one disadvantage with the Uzi is if you kit it out, the ADS speed is not great and you cannot attach a laser to compensate for this. So the ADS speed is not great, fully kitted, but as you can see, quite the laser. I will use this wall a lot to showcase the recoil. To control it, it's a bit jumpy. You have a big magazine. 35 shots. So it's not a perfect laser, but you get a very nice suppressed weapon. And to do so, I chose the practical suppressor. Now for recoil in general and the stats of a weapon. If you just focus on control, you will still get a somewhat jumpy weapon, because you have to take stability into account as best as you can. Think of it this way. Stability is more about weapon sway, but the weapon sways even when you are aiming. So maybe that explains a little bit. So just going for pure control, like extremely high rates, but decreasing stability, will still result in a somewhat jumpy weapon. And if you look at the components, the practical suppressor has a lot of control, but has a handling deficit. That's why I usually pair it with a laser, which I cannot do on a Uzi. And we have a handguard that is across the board. A very nice option here. The barrel has some control in it. And I have a stock that is somewhat on the budget and gives me a decent amount of control. So if you go for a full budget build, I would go with the cheap practical suppressor, and as a solo player with an SMG, I usually go with a suppressed weapon because of gunshot sound range is down to 210 meters. So I think that's worth it. So if you can see, if you take the budget suppressor, which will save us some money, and we'll put the build just around 100k, you will get a lot of handling, so ADS speed is better, but you lose control and stability. With this setup, you are around 100k, but you will have to deal with a more jumpy gun that is still not bad. And ADS speed is now a lot better. So I think that's enough recoil reduction here, and that's a nice build for a basic Uzi submachine gun. Now I do like the Bizon a bit better because you have more options and you can build it even cheaper. So if you go for a budget build, I sit around 70k. So I choose the handguard, a barrel upgrade, that's the cheap suppressor. The AK stable rear grip, which is a nice budget option for a decent amount of control. And the Bizon and the AKS have great options for the stock. So if you take a look at this stock, it's only 3K and the pad is only 2K. And those effects stack up. If you want a better stock with better control and stability, you have to invest into something like the Spec Ops Tactical stock, which is better slightly, but also much more expensive. This is the only stock I would take over the cheap option. You can take whatever optic you want. You don't have a laser, so it's a really cheap gun with a nice chunky magazine. And if we take a look, you see the ADS speed is fine. Not perfect, but good enough. And not too shabby. A bit jumpy, not a perfect laser, but you have to see the amount of money you have invested here. So it's like a 70K super budget option. And I would always kit out my Bizon like this for the bare minimum. Now, if you pimp out the Bizon and go like with the more or less best options, you will land around 120K. Still a lot cheaper than you need for other weapons to reach the same level of recoil and control. So if you apply this, we have a more expensive suppressor, we have a laser, and the rest is the same. Let me go to the firing range. Now with the laser, ADS speed is around the same. We lose something with the other options, but we regain it with the laser. And as you can see, this thing is much less jumpy than the cheap version. For just 50K more, get a pretty nice starter SMG. It's a great budget option. Now if we stick a little bit from cheapest to most expensive builds today, I would switch over to rifles. And the next cool options, I think, is the AKS. Because we can build this weapon with the 160K setup that has the same handling features more or less than a 200K weapon. So we go to apply, take a look at the firing range. ADS speed is pretty quick with the laser. The firing rate is a lot slower, but you have great control. A tad bit jumpy, but for that amount of money, I think this is a great build. The AKS has the same cheap stock option like the Bizon. It has a very good special suppressor for the Russian weapons. And overall, you can see the most expensive parts are maybe the right rail, the laser, and the upper handguard with 23K, not that expensive. And you get a really chunky, nice weapon with high armor penetration and high damage, but a low fire rate. Now, if you want to invest a little bit more, you can see you can make a jump. It's mainly the stock here to around 200K. So then you are in the range of other weapons that you can build with the same like recoil and control. But now we have a different stock and a different rear grip. A little bit more expensive. Go to the firing range. ADS speed is nearly the same. And now you really have like, look at this, it's on point. That's like a freaking laser. And you have to build other weapons for around 300 to 400K to reach that amount of control. So the AKS is a fantastic budget option that you can also pimp out a little bit more and get a very, very nice weapon. I really grow to like this weapon and use it a lot. The next best option in terms of price to performance, I would say, is the SMG, the SR3M. You can build this with just shy of 200k and you get a very, very powerful weapon. High damage and armor penetration, pretty chunky fire rate. You go to apply. Again, you have this special suppressor for the Russian weapons. ADS speed is fine. It's a tad bit jumpy, but you have the much higher fire rate than the AKS before. For that kind of fire rate, it's okay. It's not perfect, but it's a build for less than 200k or around 200k. So I think this is a great, still, I would call it, it's not a budget option, I would say it's a mid-tier option. And what you get is a very high fire rate and armor penetration. So this is a great option, I think, before going into more expensive builds. So next up, I would say if you want to stick with SMGs especially for zero dam, and of course you can build a Vector for an absurd amount of money and a P90. The SMG 45 is a somewhat overlooked weapon because the fire rate is not that high, but you get a high base armor penetration and damage. And lower fire rate means more control. So if you take this, I started out with a true budget option. Let's take a look. It's just like some basics. It's very cheap. It's 100k. If you go to apply and to the firing range, you will see it's not a bad weapon by any means. And you get a large magazine, by the way. You can have long goes of sustained fire. You have especially some vertical recoil, but it's not that bad. You see, it's just 100k. So this is like my starter option for this weapon. But you can go like around 200k. I had an in-between build, but I really don't use that anymore. I go either cheap or go full out for 200k, which is my like mid-tier range for any weapon. And if you go for the 200k build, which again has a better suppressor, we have nice ADS speed. And now we have a much tighter spread. So it's easy to control, long periods of sustained fire with the large magazine. Not as perfect as a laser as the AKS in the 200k range, but close enough. I think it's a really great recoil pattern, and for that amount of money again, a very nice build. As I said, I will leave all the links in the video description. So next up in my section of builds that I use, I would go for the rifles and go for the infamous QBZ95-1. I had a starter loadout for around 200k. Then I tried to go to a budget build that was still around 190k, so not that much of a difference. But this one is silenced with a cheap silencer. And yeah, let's take a look at this first. So this is a cheap silencer. I usually, with the assault rifles, I take a pistol with me, so I don't really need a silencer. But let's take a look here. So it's a bit jumpy, a like vertical recoil, not bad. But as you can see from the pure stats here, I would go with the no silencer version if I want to stay just below 200k. Because you get a nice performance boost. It's a little bit better to control, still some vertical recoil, but overall it's a very controllable gun. Now if you want to invest a little bit more, you get a silenced and a non-silenced version. And the silenced version, that's my like definite build for this weapon. You see it has a very high control stat and a very high stability stat, but it suffers from handling. So the laser is there to compensate this, and this build here, as you can see, doesn't have a silencer, it has similar stats, but better handling. And as you can see, the biggest downside of this fully pimped out build will be the ADS speed. It's not super bad, but also not. As you can see, a lot less vertical recoil. That thing, it's a laser. It's superb handling. I really love to use this build, especially. So it's a great silenced option with the downside of some not so perfect ADS speed. Now, if you go with a non-silenced version, which is basically the same, just a different muzzle, and I have a different optic here, we can change that. The optic doesn't really matter, you can take whatever you want. That's for the sake of argument, take the same as we had before. So this is just the same weapon with a non-silenced version. It's basically the same recoil. Very easy to control. And if you take a pistol with you, as a solo player, it doesn't really matter that the gun makes more noise because you have a pistol for anything else. So, but as you can see, you will go into a different region here, 250k. You can start around 200k, but for that amount of money, you get a very nice weapon, high armor penetration, decent fire rate. A lot of build options, really to make it your own build. It's a very nice option, in my opinion. Now, I try to use, or I used the ASVAL as a solo player for a long time. Because it has a very high fire rate, it is the most silent gun in the game, together with the sniper version of this weapon. Problem is, this gun, as long as you don't switch the barrel, will always be somewhat jumpy in terms of recoil. So I tried with different builds here, as you can see, to just below 200k, 200k, 250, but with the same initial barrel. And even if I go with the best build here, 250k, and I go for apply, and into the firing range, see it, how it jumps around. So once you have the ADS speed is fine. See, you have these jumps, and you're not really, especially the initial jump away from the target. It's very annoying. So once you're somewhat centered around the target, but there's this initial jump that you really cannot get rid of. Or you go full 350k and switch the barrel, which is very expensive. Now, you see, it is still a little bit jumpy, but far less slow. You see, the initial jump is nearly non-existent, and you now can really laser. And you have a very, very high fire. Even with shitty ammunition, you can melt enemy armor. So if you are just on purple rounds or even blue and you are running against purple or golden armor, with this high fire rate and this really laser-like recoil pattern. It's a fantastic option, but a very expensive one. 350k, I think it's a lot of money, and I'm sitting on 250 millions in total value. So yeah, I could spend this all the time, no problem, but I think it's a pretty expensive build, but then you get a great weapon. Below that budget, you have to live with a somewhat jumpy weapon. Otherwise, the Ace-Vel is a fantastic weapon. Now, we leave all the scars and all the meta builds here. Another option in the rifle section I really like is the SG552 if you want to stay with the 556 ammunition. Now, the AUG, you can build a really good AUG, but it's a lot more expensive to build. Same for the K416. And of course you have your M4s and AKM builds. But the SG552 is really, with this fire rate, a nice weapon to build around, and it's very cheap initially. And you have a lot of build options. So for the final weapon of this small overview, I will take a loader that's around 190k. Apply. We switch the optic here to compare it better to the other builds. Got the firing range. A very quick ADS speed. Very high fire rate. And for that kind of fire rate, it has a very nice recoil pattern. It's a tad bit jumping. See, it's jumping around a little bit. But then again, you have a very high fire rate. And it is kind of a budget build. It's still below 200k. So I think for the money you invest here, you get a great gun. And I will always invest into calibrating my guns, but it's a topic for itself maybe. So these are my favorite weapons in terms of SMGs and rifles for a mid-tier, somewhat budget builds, and you will find all the links in the video description. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, just leave a comment. I will try to answer them all. And please post your own builds and recommendations for other players. It's always nice to exchange some ideas here, and let me know what you think about builds. Take good care of yourself and enjoy your gaming sessions.